The fire alarm screamed through the hallway at 11:47 on Christmas Eve. I was carrying blankets to the back room of the shelter when the ceiling turned orange. Smoke poured through a crack in the wall like something alive. And somewhere on the second floor, a child was crying. That sound cut through everything, every siren, every shout, every instinct telling me to run. I dropped the blankets and moved toward the stairs. 6 hours earlier, my daughter had told me not to come for Christmas. But standing at the bottom of a burning staircase, that conversation felt like it belonged to a different life. To understand how I ended up inside that building, I need to take you back. Not just hours, years. Back to a man who spent 67 years learning one truth that almost everyone learns too late. My name is Thomas Edward Brennan. I am 67 years old. I live in Ridgewood, North Carolina, where the mountains flatten into farmland and the air smells like pine sap and chimney smoke from October through March. I drive a 1994 Chevy pickup with a cracked dashboard and a passenger seat covered in dog hair. The dog responsible is a yellow Labrador named Duke. He is 11, mostly deaf, and believes every stranger exists solely to scratch his ears. Every morning I wake around 5:30. My body refuses to sleep past that hour. I make coffee in a percolator that belonged to my father. I sit on the back porch if the weather allows it. I watch the ridge turn gold as the sun rises behind the tree line. Then I drive into town. Patty runs the only diner worth visiting. She knows my order without asking. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, same booth by the window. Same view of the hardware store across the street where old paint cans sit in the window display like they have been waiting for someone to claim them since 1987. After breakfast, I stop by whoever needs help that week. A leaking faucet for Mrs. Calloway. A stuck garage door for Martin down the road. A broken fence for the pastor at First Baptist. I do not charge for any of it. People around here think I am a retired safety inspector. That is not exactly a lie, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth involves a different kind of work, the kind that does not get discussed at diners, the kind that leaves marks on a man in places no one can see. I spent 26 years in the Navy. Most of those years were not spent on a ship. I will leave it at that. When I came home for good, I wanted silence. A small house and a slow life and a woman who made the silence feel like music. I found her. Her name was Catherine. We were married 31 years. She died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, the kind that whispers before it shouts. By the time the doctors found it, the whispering was over. I will not describe the last months. Some things do not belong in stories. They belong in the quiet places inside a man where no one else is allowed. Catherine was wiser than me, always wiser. She had a saying she repeated so often it became the rhythm of our life. You do not measure a man by how he stands in comfort. You measure him by how he stands in storms. She said it when I came home frustrated. She said it when I doubted myself. And she said it one last time 3 days before she died, holding my hand in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and silence. After she passed, the house changed. Not physically, but the air felt heavier. I made coffee for 2 out of habit, then poured the second cup down the sink. I reached across the bed at night and found nothing. I talked to Duke more than any grown man should. I ate dinner standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone made the silence louder. Grief does not hit you all at once. It arrives in ordinary moments. A song on the radio you did not expect. A brand of lavender soap at the grocery store that stops you in the aisle. A winter coat still hanging in the closet that smells faintly of her perfume when the weather changes. The tick of the kitchen clock at 3 in the morning when the house feels like a museum of everything you used to have. You learn to carry it. You never learn to put it down. The one thing that kept me anchored was Grace, my daughter, my only child. She was 34, smart, independent, taught English at a high school 2 towns over. The students loved her. Her eyes lit up when she talked about them the same way Catherine's used to. Grace was the best thing I ever helped create. If this story is already sitting heavy in your chest, if something about it feels familiar in a way you did not expect, I hope you will stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this one keep reaching the people who need to hear them. Then she met Marcus. Marcus Devlin, 38, financial advisor, ran his own firm in Charlotte, drove a silver car that cost more than my house, wore shirts with no wrinkles, and shoes that clicked on tile floors. The first time Grace brought him to dinner, he shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and complimented the brisket I had spent 4 hours smoking. He asked about Ridgewood. He listened when I spoke. I wanted to like him. I tried hard for Grace, for Catherine, for the part of me that wanted my daughter to be happy. And for a while, I almost convinced myself. Marcus had warmth that was hard to deny. I once watched him kneel beside a stray cat outside a gas station and feed it pieces of his sandwich. No hesitation, no performance, just kindness. That moment stayed with me. It made everything that came later harder to accept. The first sign came at Thanksgiving. Marcus told a story about a client who lost money on a bad investment. He described the man's panic with amusement, laughed at his confusion, at his stuttering. Grace laughed along, nervously. The kind of laugh people produce when they are not sure something is funny but do not want to seem difficult. I said nothing. I chewed my food and moved on. The candlelight flickered across the table. Outside, a cold November wind pressed against the windows. But something tightened inside me. Not anger, something quieter. The instinct I had spent decades trusting, the one that told me when a room was about to change. People reveal who they are, not in grand moments, but in small ones, in the jokes they choose, in whose pain they find entertaining. A father learns early that criticizing a daughter's partner is the fastest way to lose both of them. So I waited. I watched. The second sign came in January. Marcus walked through my kitchen and looked around like a man touring outdated appliances. Nice place, he said. Cozy. Then he pointed at the cabinet above the stove. You could really open this place up, knock out that wall, double the value. I looked at the cabinet. Catherine had painted it herself, pale blue with small white flowers. She spent an entire weekend on it. I could still see a faint thumbprint near the handle where the paint smudged. I smiled. I like it the way it is. He shrugged. Sure, if that is what you prefer. That was how Marcus operated. Never a direct insult, just constant, gentle pressure, suggesting everything around him could be better, that nothing was quite enough. The third sign came without warning. I drove to Grace's apartment to drop off a box of Catherine's recipe cards. She met me at the door, looking tired. Not physically. The other kind. The kind that sits behind the eyes and does not leave after sleep. I noticed her phone on the counter, screen facing down. Catherine always said you could learn everything about a person by watching what they hide. That detail sat in my chest like a stone. That decision to stay silent would turn out to be one I carried for a long time. The fourth sign was the worst. Grace told a story at dinner about a student whose essay made her cry in front of the class. She described it with such tenderness my throat tightened. When she finished, Marcus nodded. That is sweet, babe. But you probably should not cry in front of students. It makes you look emotional. Grace blinked. The light in her eyes dimmed, just enough for a father to notice. She cut a piece of steak and looked down at her plate. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and charcoal. Outside, crickets sang in the warm dark. Everything around us was beautiful, and my daughter had just been made to feel small for caring about a child. That was the moment instinct became certainty. Something was wrong, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that erodes a person so slowly they do not realize they are disappearing. Summer passed, then fall. Grace called less often. The conversations were shorter. She laughed differently, higher pitched, quicker, the way a person laughs when they are performing happiness rather than feeling it. She stopped mentioning friends, stopped talking about her book club. Her world was shrinking, and Marcus was the one holding the walls. In October, I watched Marcus treat a waitress like she was furniture, sent back his water because it was not cold enough, never once looked her in the eye. Grace sat across from him with her hands in her lap. I tipped the waitress 40% on my way out, She looked at me like I had handed her something more valuable than money. There is a type of man who treats strangers as practice for how he will eventually treat the people closest to him. I could see it the way a sailor sees weather before the clouds arrive. November came cold and fast. I was splitting firewood when Grace called. Her voice was too steady, the kind of steady people manufacture before delivering something fragile. Marcus and I are hosting Christmas this year at his place in Charlotte. His family is coming from Virginia. She paused. Dad, Marcus thinks it might be overwhelming if too many people are there. My hand rested on the axe handle. The wood was cold. I knew what she was saying. She wrapped it in his name. But the message was clear. You are not invited. A crow called somewhere in the distance. Something inside me became perfectly still, the way it used to before a mission. Okay, I said. She exhaled like she had been holding her breath. Really? Have a good time, sweetheart. That night I sat at the kitchen table with Duke at my feet. Catherine's blue cabinet glowed in the light from the stove. I could almost hear her voice. You do not measure a man by how he stands in comfort. I was not standing in comfort, but I was still standing. I had no idea that by Christmas morning my face would be on every station in the state, and I had no idea that the man my daughter chose over me would soon be standing in the rubble of his own lies. December crawled forward. I volunteered at the Ridgewood Community Shelter 3 days a week. The shelter operated out of a converted warehouse on the edge of town, served hot meals, offered cots during cold weather. The director was Helen Park, 61. Former social worker. She ran the place with equal parts compassion and stubbornness. Most of my work was physical, fixing things, moving things, repairing the heating system that broke with the reliability of a clock. I also sat with people. That sounds simple. It is not. Sitting with someone who has lost everything requires patience most people have never practiced. You do not offer advice, you just sit. You listen. You let them feel human for a few minutes. Before I continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are watching from. I read every single one. Knowing you are out there keeps these stories alive. Christmas Eve arrived under a sky the color of wet cement, 19 degrees by noon. I woke at 5:30, made coffee. Duke looked at me from his bed near the radiator as if I had lost my mind for stepping onto the porch. Around 2, Helen called. Thomas, we are short tonight. Storm is coming fast. I was already reaching for my coat. The shelter was busy. 23 people by 4 o'clock. Families, single men with nowhere else. A woman with 2 small children who could not have been older than 4 and 6. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. The boy stood close to his mother with his hand wrapped in the fabric of her coat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled like instant coffee and damp wool. I spent the first hour fixing the boiler. By 6, the temperature had stabilized. I moved to the kitchen, made coffee, heated soup, carried trays. A man named Arthur sat alone at a corner table, maybe 70, thin, wearing a coat mended more times than it should have been. He stared at the soup without eating. I sat across from him. You all right? He looked up, eyes red. Today is my wife's birthday. She passed in April. I sat with him 20 minutes. We barely talked. Some silences say more than words ever could. Around 8:30, I smelled something wrong. Electrical, hot wiring. Then the alarm split the air. Smoke was seeping through the far wall. The wall separating the shelter from a vacant commercial space next door. I moved immediately. Muscle memory took over. I had not done this work in decades. But the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Everyone moved toward the front door. Do not run. Walk fast. Stay together. Helen called emergency services. I counted heads. 20, 21, 22. I stopped. We had 23. Arthur, his table was empty. His coat still hung over the chair. The smoke was heavier now. I moved toward the back hallway. Helen shouted my name. I did not stop. The hallway was dark. I pulled my shirt over my nose. My eyes burned. I found Arthur in the bathroom. sitting on the floor, disoriented. Arthur, we need to go. My wife's birthday, he said again. I know. But she would want you to walk out of here. I got him to his feet. We moved through the hallway slowly. The heat was building behind the wall. I could hear something cracking. We reached the main room. The front door was open. Cold air poured in. Arthur stumbled. My knee buckled under the weight. Pain shot up my leg. I caught us both. Then we were outside. The cold hit like a wall of water. Beautiful, freezing, life-saving air. I lowered Arthur onto a bench near the sidewalk. He was coughing but breathing. His hands gripped my arm like he was afraid the ground would disappear. 2 fire trucks were pulling up. Red lights spinning against the dark buildings. Sirens cutting through the falling snow. I sat on the curb. My hands shook. Not from fear, from the adrenaline leaving my body. The oldest trick in the world. Your body gives you everything you need in the moment. Then it takes payment afterward. I did not notice the television crew until later. A young reporter spotted me. Can I ask you a few questions? I shrugged. She asked about the fire, the shelter. I answered because my guard was down. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Do you have family waiting at home tonight? My jaw tightened. I looked past the camera at the dark sky. Snowflakes were beginning to fall. Not tonight, I said. No family? My daughter is spending Christmas with someone else this year. I said it without anger, without self-pity, the way you say something true that you have already accepted. The reporter paused, thanked me, moved on. I sat on that curb another 10 minutes. The paramedics cleaned a cut on my hand, checked my knee, wanted me to go to the hospital. I wanted my bed. I drove home slowly. Duke was waiting. He could not hear me, but felt the vibration. I sat in my recliner. Every muscle ached. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. Grace! Dad? Her voice was raw, shaky, unprotected. Dad, why are you on the news? I looked at the television. There I was, covered in soot, sitting on a curb. Grace, everyone is fine. She was not listening. Why were you at a shelter on Christmas Eve? Because they needed help. Why did you not tell me? Because you told me not to come. The silence that followed was the loudest I had ever heard. She did not speak for nearly a minute. When she finally did, her voice was barely a whisper. I did not know. I know. She cried. Not politely. I let her cry. Some things need to break before they can be rebuilt. The story aired the next morning, then at noon. By afternoon, 2 other stations had picked it up. The clip spread the way small things sometimes do when they land on a wound the whole world shares. Thousands of comments appeared, people telling their own stories, fathers left out of holidays, grandparents waiting by phones that never rang. My story was not special. It was just the one with a camera pointed at it. A reporter named Sophie Lambert called 2 days later. She wanted to write something longer about the shelter, the volunteers. She spent 3 hours at my kitchen table. Then she asked about my background. I gave her the official version. She looked at me the way people do when they know someone is editing. You are leaving something out. Everybody leaves something out. Her article appeared a week later. People in town started treating me differently. Meanwhile, Grace called every day. Short conversations. She did not mention Marcus. Then one evening in January, her voice changed again. Not shaky, tired. Dad, I need to tell you something. Marcus and I are not doing well. I waited. He controls everything. The money, the schedule, who I see. He reviews my phone. How long? Since the beginning. That answer dropped through me like a stone through water. Not because it surprised me, because I had known and stayed silent while a man I never trusted tightened his grip on my daughter. Catherine's voice came back to me, clear as morning. You do not measure a man by how he stands in comfort. I took a breath. Come home, Grace. The next morning I opened a trunk in the back of my closet. Inside were things from a different life. Service records, commendation letters, a photograph of a younger version of me standing with people whose names I cannot say publicly, Underneath was a leather folder, financial records, contact information for a network of people who investigate fraud. Because Marcus Devlin's business was not entirely legitimate. I had suspected it for over a year. Small inconsistencies, numbers that did not add up, the casual confidence of a man who knows no one is checking his work. I called an old friend, Robert Chen. We served together decades ago. He now worked in financial compliance for a federal agency. I told him what I knew. He told me what he could find. Within 2 weeks, the picture became clear. Marcus had been diverting client funds into personal accounts through shell companies. Not massive amounts, but steady. Enough to fund the silver car and the expensive shoes and the Christmas dinners where my daughter's father was not welcome. I did not tell Grace. She had come home to Ridgewood, sleeping in her old room, eating meals at the table where Catherine once sat. I gave her space. Grace helped at the shelter 3 times that month. She met Arthur. She met Helen. She sat with people the way I had taught her without knowing I was teaching her. One evening she came home with red eyes. A woman at the shelter told me she had not heard her own name spoken kindly in 2 years. That is why we go. She looked at me. Then she said something I will carry forever. I forgot who you were. She was not talking about the fire. She was talking about everything underneath. The quiet years of service, the patience, the way I had loved her mother and her, all the things that hold a life together without making noise. In February, Marcus hosted his firm's annual charity gala in Charlotte. Grace received an invitation. He wants me to come back, she said. As a gesture, I looked at the invitation. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering. Do you want to go? She shook her head. I do, I said. She stared at me. None of us knew what the next 2 hours would bring. I wore a dark suit. Grace drove. She did not know about the leather folder inside my jacket. The ballroom was large. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, a string quartet playing something forgettable. Marcus stood near the center. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect smile. He saw Grace first. Relief crossed his face. Then he saw me. The calculation shifted. Thomas, he extended his hand. Great to see you. I shook it. Firm, brief. He turned to Grace. You look wonderful. She said nothing. Marcus spoke for another minute about the event. Then the host invited him to deliver his annual address. He walked to the stage with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned in his own house. He talked about community, responsibility, giving back, every sentence crafted. The audience smiled. When he finished, they applauded. Then I stood up, calmly, the way you stand when you have already decided and the decision is no longer negotiable. I walked toward the stage. Marcus saw me approaching. His smile flickered. I stepped onto the stage. The microphone was still live. I told the audience I was not a man who gives speeches. I told them I was retired. I lived in a small town and fixed faucets and volunteered at a shelter. Then I opened the leather folder. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I read the facts, account numbers, transfer dates, shell company names, dollar amounts diverted from client portfolios over 3 years. I read them the way I would read a weather report. The room went silent. Marcus's face emptied of color. His mouth opened. No words came. I looked at him, not with hatred, not with triumph, with the sadness of a man who had hoped to be wrong. These documents have been forwarded to the appropriate authorities, I said. I set the folder on the podium. Then I spoke to Grace. You deserve a man who builds you up, not one who makes you small so he can feel tall. Your mother knew that. I know that. Now you know it too. Grace stood in the middle of that room with tears on her face, but she was not broken. She was standing, straight, steady, stronger than I had seen her in years. Marcus tried to speak. His voice cracked. He looked at the audience, at the folder, at me. Something real crossed his face. Not charm, fear. The kind that arrives when a man realizes the floor beneath him was never solid. He stepped away from the microphone. His hands trembled. He walked off the stage without a word. No defense, no explanation, just silence. Grace found me outside. The air was cold. My breath came out in white clouds. She grabbed my arm. Dad, I knew. I did not say I told you so. That phrase has never healed anything. I put my arm around her and stood there until she was ready to move. The months that followed were slow, the kind of slow that heals. Grace moved back to Ridgewood. She rented a small cottage near the center of town. White shutters, a front porch barely big enough for 2 rocking chairs. She hung a bird feeder from the eave and filled it every morning the way Catherine used to fill ours. She started teaching again at the local high school. The students adored her. I could tell because she talked about them with fire again, with love, with the kind of energy that told me she was coming back to herself. One evening she called me laughing so hard she could barely speak. A student had written an essay comparing Shakespeare to professional wrestling. She read me the best parts. Her laughter sounded like music I had not heard in years. I kept volunteering. Helen called me director of things that break. Arthur became a regular volunteer. He organized the pantry with military precision. He still missed his wife, but he had found a way to carry the missing without letting it carry him. Grace brought dinner to my house every Sunday. Fried chicken, cornbread, Catherine's recipes. The chicken was sometimes dry, the cornbread sometimes flat. But we sat at the table together. Duke snored under the table. The kitchen window was open. You could smell cut grass and honeysuckle from the yard. And the silence that once felt heavy now felt like something else entirely, like rest, like home. Like the kind of peace you cannot buy or build, but can only arrive at after walking through everything that tried to take it from you. One Sunday, Grace set down her fork. Dad, why did you never tell me about your real career? Because it was not the part that mattered. She studied me. What part mattered? This. I gestured at the table, the food, the kitchen, the blue cabinet, the dog sleeping by the door, all of it. She nodded. And I think she finally understood what Catherine always knew. When I was young, I believed strength meant never flinching, standing tall no matter what, silence and endurance and swallowing every hard thing without complaint. War taught me something different. The strongest men I ever knew were the ones who could sit with someone in pain, the ones who admitted they were scared, the ones who carried others not because they were unbreakable, but because they chose to break in private so someone else could stay whole. And aging taught me the final lesson, the one Catherine tried to give me before I was ready. Strength is not what you survive. It is what you protect when no one is watching. It is the drive to a shelter on Christmas Eve. The second cup of coffee you stop making because the person who drank it is gone. Standing in a burning hallway at 67 because a stranger needed someone to say your wife would want you to walk out of here. That is strength. Not the kind the world applauds. The kind the world almost never sees. If this story stayed with you tonight, if it reminded you of someone who loved you in ways you did not always notice, share it with them. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And leave a comment telling me what moment hit you the hardest. Sometimes the people who need these words the most find them through someone like you. The people who care enough to pass them along.